Hello, welcome to another installment of the Pandemic Baseball Book Club. My name is Andrew Forbes. I'm the author of The Only Way is the Steady Way. And today I'm joined by Jim Alexander. Jim is the author of Dodgers, an informal history from Flatbush to Chavez Ravine. Jim is a sports columnist for the Southern California News Group, which includes the Los Angeles Daily News and the Orange County Registered. I'm going to start that over again because I don't like registered.
It's register.
I know. I can see it right there in front of me. I'm also going to get rid of my cat because she's going to jump up on the computer if I'm not Leave me paying attention to something other than her.
I know how that goes. We've got two dogs who are kind of our editorial assistants. So the one wants to go outside. So she comes in and barks at me. My wife is sitting in the other room and is close to the door, but no, she comes in and barks to me. You go out. So that's our
that one hopped up on the laptop the other day and printed a couple of paragraphs of X's, and I thought, well, it's no worse than anything I've written today. So yeah, I'll get it this time.
It's promising, but it needs some work, right? Yeah,
that's right. Hello and welcome to another installment of the Pandemic Baseball Book Club. My name is Andrew Forbes. I'm the author of The Only Way is the Steady Way. And today I'm joined by Jim Alexander. Jim is the author of Dodgers, an informal history from Flatbush to Chavez Ravine. He's a sports columnist for the Southern California News Group, which includes the Los Angeles Daily News and the Orange County Register. And he's covered sports in Southern California for more than 4 decades, including the Dodgers as a beat for 12 seasons and frequent columns about them in the years since. Jim, welcome to the Pandemic Baseball Book Club.
I'm happy to be here.
I really enjoyed the book, Jim, and one of the aspects I liked most was the tone. It's a funny book, laugh out loud funny in places, and the voice is that of a seasoned sports writer sitting and telling stories in the bar after the game. Was that intentional on your part, or after decades of columns and game wraps, is that just your natural voice coming out?
It's pretty much my natural voice. I mean, that's the way I try and write my columns. I mean, the idea of sitting around in the bar after the game, I like that. I hadn't thought of it that way, but over the years covering the beat, you do enough of it. And there are a couple of anecdotes in the book along those lines anyway. So yeah, but baseball is an oral sport in a lot of ways. It's a verbal sport. It's a storytelling sport. And I think that's why there are so many good books about the subject, because there are so many stories to tell. And with these guys, I mean, it's just, I hadn't even thought all the way back to 1883 and the roots of the franchise. I mean, out here, we think of the past 60 some years of the Dodgers in Los Angeles and, winning the World Series in 1955 in Brooklyn and the Boys of Summer. But for most people, it doesn't go back much farther than that. And I found it incredibly interesting, all the stuff that happened in the 1880s and 1890s and early 1900s. I mean, there's a whole history here that nobody really seems to have touched. So it was fun digging through that stuff, and it was fun putting it together.
It's fun to read through. And as you mentioned, the book does trace the history of the Dodgers organization from their beginnings in the American Association way back in 1883. And you bring it right up to the 2020 World Championship and then an epilogue from 2021. Mm-hmm. But I'm interested, maybe not the most, but I am specifically interested in how the Brooklyn Dodgers that you're talking about, Dem Bums and the Boys of Summer, how they became the Hollywood Dodgers. You write about Walter O'Malley's awareness that Los Angeles fans, when he moved the team there in '58, wanted those Brooklyn Dodgers. They wanted Duke Snider and Carl Furillo and Gil Hodges and Campy if they could have had him. But, that team had been characterized as kind of lovable losers or also-rans to the Yankees for so many years, with the exception of '55. They were scruffy and sort of anti-glamorous. How long until they came to resemble their surroundings in Los Angeles? And was there a catalyst, whether it was an event or a person, for that change?
Well, basically the first year, 1958, it's almost like they gave away a year. It's like you're bringing, I mean, they're not planning to lose or anything like that. They're bringing out all these veterans, and they're bringing them to an environment totally unlike anything they'd ever played in. The Los Angeles Coliseum, where you had that dinky wall behind left field, and then center field and right field where you might as well have been hitting into the Grand Canyon. And I told the story in there. The first day, the Dodgers and the new Los Angeles Dodgers and San Francisco Giants had opened the season in San Francisco. So now they're coming down to LA to open for the Dodgers home opener at the Coliseum. And the Dodgers had a parade. They went down Broadway, opened convertibles and all that. And people were there to greet them and wish them well and welcome them. So they get to the ballpark late. And I guess the Giants had already been there taking early BP or what have you. So Duke Snider walks toward the field. There's a tunnel behind what was home plate in a baseball configuration. It's behind the end zone football. So, and the clubhouses are back there. So Duke is walking through the tunnel toward the field, and Willie Mays spots him. And Willie's eyes light up, his face lights up, and he runs over to Duke and says basically, "Look what they did to you," showing him that right field fence.
Yeah.
And the thing about that, and I know I'm kind of digressing here, but a lot of the veterans had problems dealing with that. And with Snider, it was not only the fence and the distance, but it was the fact that, you know, he had a bum knee and he was trying to hit on that. And I think I quoted a doctor in there saying that when he opened it up, it was the worst or second worst he'd ever seen. So Duke was physically limited, and it took him a while to adjust to park factors. Okay. But the interesting thing, and I also see this with Don Drysdale, who was a young pitcher then, he's from Southern California, and that left field fence got in his head. But those guys learned how to pitch and how to hit in that ballpark. And I made the observation that Duke's OPS, which we recognize now, it was not, nobody knew what that was then. His OPS, his last like 2 years in the Coliseum, was much better than his OPS the first year in Dodger Stadium in 1962, which was his last year with the Dodgers, because then he went to the Mets and then he wound up with the Giants. But 59, you had a bunch of guys coming in to replace the veterans. You had Maury Wills. You had Tommy Davis starting to have an impact. You had guys like Charlie Neal and Don Demeter and Chuck Esigian, and you know, Koufax was starting to get it. He didn't truly get it for a couple more years, but he was starting to emerge as a starter and as a strikeout threat. So this new breed was starting to come along in 1959, and they basically took baseball by surprise. They defeated the defending National League champion Braves in a best of three playoff, and then they beat the White Sox in the World Series. So all of a sudden, 2 years in, Los Angeles is not only the capital of the baseball world, they're setting World Series attendance records that will never be broken because they're playing in a 92,000 seat stadium. So right. All of a sudden, and I'm sure that people back east, people in New York, people in Brooklyn, were just beside themselves. And I jump ahead to the way we in Los Angeles reacted when the St. Louis Rams won the Super Bowl. And it's like, this was like about 5 years after the move. And Giorgio Frontieri gets up in front of the crowd and says, this shows that we made the right decision in moving to St. Louis. And she was, it is hard to overestimate how angry people in LA were. So I would imagine that you would take that and multiply it by 10, and that's what you had with Brooklyn fans. That,
right.
My God, that's our team And now they're winning for those people.
Right.
So, but I will also say, and in the book, I basically look at it from the LA point of view, obviously, because this is where I've lived. And the idea that, O'Malley wanted a park in Brooklyn. He wanted a new park. Ebbets Field was old, it was decaying. He had issues with the demographic composition of the borough. We won't go any farther than that, but you kind of get what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
But Robert Moses, who was basically the czar of public works in New York, he wasn't going to do anything O'Malley wanted. I don't know if there was a grudge there from the past, but O'Malley wanted Brooklyn. Moses said, no, we'll build you something out in Flushing, which is now where Shea Stadium was and where Citi Field is now. And O'Malley said, no, I want Brooklyn. Well, you can't have Brooklyn. Well, then he started thinking seriously. They scheduled games in Jersey City just as kind of an experiment, but it was more of an experiment. I think people understood that. And one of my favorite parts of the book is the conversation that I had with Roz Wyman, who was then a young city councilwoman in LA. I think she'd been elected in 52 or something like that. And one of the planks of her campaign was to bring big league baseball to Los Angeles. And this was years before anybody even thought the Dodgers were in play. Well, all of a sudden they are. She and another city councilman sent a letter to O'Malley. I think it was 55. It was 1955. And they sent it saying, we would like to talk to you. We understand you're having issues there. We want to talk to you on behalf of the city of Los Angeles. And O'Malley originally ignored it. And later on, when he did respond, he said, I thought it was a publicity stunt. And anyway, there's no way I can talk to you right now because we're getting ready for a World Series. But I think that sort of planted the germ in his head. And Roz Wyman from her end and a county supervisor by the name of Kenneth Hahn were the ones that really got the ball rolling and got LA people excited, got LA city government people involved, and got O'Malley's attention. And the closer, what sealed the deal, was the day that Kenneth Hahn and Walter O'Malley chartered a helicopter and flew over Chavez Ravine, what would one day be the site of Dodger Stadium. And O'Malley saw all that real estate and the opportunities there, and he was sold. So that's what got him to LA.
You quote Davey Lopes as saying, Richie Allen once said the Dodgers don't want ball players, they want public relations men. And in Lopes' estimation, that was pretty damn close to the truth, he said. He was talking in that case about Steve Garvey, but is the atmosphere in Southern California unique and in some ways challenging for certain ball players?
Not so much as it is in New York, because that's a whole different kettle of fish. I mean, just look at Joey Gallo. He's still not hitting, but at least he seems freer now in LA than he did in New York. And the New York environment, the Boston environment, that big city environment in the East where there's that, it's fanaticism. It really is. It's craziness. And some guys just are not cut out for that. And in LA, we don't have the tabloid media. I mean, it's we don't have as many hard-hitting questioners. We have a few, but it's a little less stressful unless you have to drive to and from the ballpark. But I mean, in terms of the atmosphere, it's not as stressful. It's more boisterous than it used to be. They have really developed a fan base that they're there. They stay from the first pitch to the last. So don't believe all that stuff you hear about coming late and leaving early. They're loud, they're proud, they wear blue, and it's much different than it was maybe even a decade ago. But the whole, the team's approach is different because with the O'Malley Dodgers, PR was definitely an issue, and players were told this is part of your job. Talk to the media, go out to appearances, sign autographs, and do all those things beyond what you do on the field. And that's much less so in succeeding ownerships. And now, I mean, players basically are their own individual brands. And if they go out on a Saturday morning appearance, it's not the team that set it up, it's their personal PR person that set it up. So
Sure.
it's a lot different environment now. But for all those years when the O'Malleys owned the Dodgers, first Walter and then his son Peter, that was very important.
I wonder if you have a theory as to the success of the Dodgers in both Brooklyn and LA when it comes to developing young players. They're 18 rookies of the year, twice as many as the Yankees. Why is that?
To be honest, I'm not totally sure. The one thing I would point to early on, the book that Al Campanis wrote, The Dodger Way to Play Baseball, which was basically a recitation of all the taped lectures that Branch Rickey would do. And we'll get to that later. I mean, the whole Branch Rickey, Walter O'Malley thing, that's kind of a side story in itself. Sure. But for the longest time, their organization used that book as a guide. And the idea was that when we start a guy in rookie ball or low A, we're going to teach him the way that the game is played in Los Angeles. And as he goes through the minors, every step, those lessons are going to be reinforced. So by the time he gets to the Dodgers, he knows what he's doing, and it's a seamless transition. The thing that I find far more interesting is the legacy, the pitching legacy that the Dodgers have had over the years, and you can see it down through the years, and the number of Cy Young awards and the number of ERA championships, and Koufax and Drysdale to Sutton to Fernando to Orel, to, just go down the list to Kershaw. And, I find it amazing today. They lead the major leagues in ERA. And at last count, I think they had used 16 pitchers this year, because between injuries and guys going up and down from the minors, and yet they've still been able to maintain that quality all season long. Yeah, it's amazing. But again, that's part of the team's legacy. If you're the Dodgers, you have good pitching. And if you don't have good pitching, you're going to be in trouble.
You read about the massive culture change after the O'Malleys. Peter, at that time, sold the team to Fox and Rupert Murdoch. Is that old model of family ownership and the intimacy of the operation as a result of that just completely gone? Has that gone the way of the dodo? Is it possible for someone to recreate that?
I doubt it. I doubt it because of so many changes in the business of baseball. I don't know if family ownership by itself could run a team. I mean, I'm sure there are families that have an extra 3 or 4 billion lying around, but why would they spend it on a baseball team instead of yachts and TV stations and what have you? So it would take a rare owner. And I think what the Dodgers have now with Guggenheim Baseball, with Mark Walter and his syndicate that run the team, they've got the funds to be able to do it. And they've created an atmosphere where it's not family ownership, but it's closer to the O'Malley template than either Fox or Frank McCourt. And Frank McCourt, that was a story in itself, and I'm sure we'll get to that. But
that's my next question, actually. Yeah.
And I do think that has a lot to do with their success over the last decade.
Yeah, the McCourts, though. Life for everybody associated with the Dodgers seems to have become more complicated, whether you were a fan or a player or in the front office. Was it even more difficult to cover the team during that period?
I don't think it was more difficult. I think for columnists like myself, it was almost better because you had more to write about it and you had more crazy stuff going on, and you could just tell people, look, this is who these people are. I mean, I think we figured it out early on, even before the sale of the team had closed, that whatever Frank McCourt was going to do, he was going to do it with other people's money if he could get away with it.
Right.
He did not have sufficient finances to buy the ball club on his own. Fox helped him. Fox helped him in. So I think we saw from the start that this was going to be a different atmosphere. These were owners that were going to make a lot of big promises, but they weren't going to back it up with money. And what we didn't know for a few years was that behind the scenes, they were plundering the team. They were using it as their very own ATM. And you know, the amount of money that they took out of the team was staggering. And you know, they were cutting corners. They wouldn't make a mid-season trade that might have won him a championship because of the financial ramifications. It reached the point where when Ned Colletti was the general manager, any trade he had to make, he had to get salary in return. I mean, he had to get the other team to pay a portion of the salary of the guy he was bringing in. They could have gotten CC Sabathia in 2008 when they got Manny. They, you know, the other trades that they made, they had a shot at him because Cleveland was trying to get rid of him because they were trying to dump salary, but Colletti couldn't do it because McCourt would not add any salary to the payroll. So Sabathia wound up going to Milwaukee and then to New York from there. But that was just one case of many. Cliff Lee, for example. I mean, you know, the same sort of thing. They, you know, they had to have the other team. I think it was with Texas. They had to have the other team pick up salary. Texas wouldn't do it. They traded him to Philadelphia, and Philadelphia beat the Dodgers in the playoffs that year and the next year.
Yeah, you brought up the importance of pitching. So it's not enough that a team can claim one of the greatest lefty pitchers in history in the person of Koufax. The Dodgers have to go and draft Kershaw, right? Can you talk a little bit, and you have already, but talk a little bit about those two in particular, but pitching in general and its importance to the franchise?
I mean, where do you start? I mean, Koufax's 5 years in the 60s were as brilliant as anybody's in baseball. He's the only guy who made the Hall of Fame based on 5 seasons. Because at the end of the 1960 season, he threw his spikes away. He described it in his autobiography that he didn't know if he was going to pitch again. He didn't know if he wanted to play baseball again. He was discouraged. So he threw his spikes away. He kept his glove. He figured maybe play softball in the park on Sundays or something, but that was the only reason to keep it. And then he got in the real world. I guess he had a military commitment, and then he was selling electronics or something. And he realized, hey, baseball ain't a bad life after all.
The real world sucks.
So he let Nobi Kawano, the clubhouse guy, know that I'll see you in Vero Beach in the spring. So, but yeah, I mean, and they're not totally the same type of pitcher. I mean, you think of Koufax and you think of Kershaw because of the letter K and because of the strikeouts and because of that hellacious curveball that Kershaw broke off in a spring training game against Sean Casey that was being televised back to LA, and Vince Scully just was agog over it. And so you see that, and you see the buildup, and I must admit, I was part of that buildup. I was one of the ones clamoring for him to bring him up from Jacksonville. And here's another interesting thing, and maybe this goes back to the pitching philosophy. For a lot of years, when they had their AAA club in Albuquerque or Vegas, same sort of thing, in the Pacific Coast League, it's a hitter's paradise and whatnot. And what happened was that they would send guys from AA to the majors. They would skip AAA. They did that with Fernando. I believe they did it with Steve Howe. They did it with a bunch of other guys because they just did not want them getting ruined by pitching in Albuquerque. And that was basically the same thing that they did with Kershaw.
Hmm. Kershaw's legacy, was secure quite a while ago, at least in terms of the regular season. There were those questions about his postseason performance, but he overcame those in the 2020 series. But that, of course, has its own kind of qualifications attached to it. It was the end of that strange 60-game regular season, the neutral playoff sites, and the series being held entirely in that new ballpark in Texas. The Dodgers have been the most successful team, certainly in the National League in recent years, probably in all of baseball. I wonder if there's a great desire that you sense around them to win it all this year, to kind of secure the legitimacy of this organization, because there are niggling questions about that 2020 series.
Absolutely. I think that 2020 team would have won over a full schedule. I thought they were that good, but it does leave a question hanging there. And they got to go to the White House, they got their rings, but they didn't get the parade. That was the motivation last year. Win it again, and then we can have a parade. And of course, it didn't happen. If Max Muncy doesn't get hurt, if Kershaw isn't unavailable, who knows? They might have gotten past the Braves in the NLCS, and then who knows in the World Series. But that is definitely a motivation. Leave no doubt. And that's the sort of thing that USC football coach Pete Carroll used to say. That was their mantra. I think it's these guys' mantra too. I mean, they want to get the job done because, and Dave Roberts said in spring training, we're going to win the World Series. He basically guaranteed. So they got to live up to that, but that's the goal. And I remember players in 2020 saying the goal is not to get to the World Series. The goal is to win the World Series, and nothing else will do. And that's absolutely how they're looking at it right now.
They've already surpassed 100 wins. Is this the best Dodgers team that you've covered?
I think so. I think it is. I mean, just from the standpoint of the top three in the lineup, you have Betts and Trey Turner and Freeman. I'd put that up against any in history. But I mean, it's a deeper lineup than that. Their pitching has spoken for itself, even with all the injuries. They may have the best defensive outfield in baseball, and it doesn't matter who you put out there. You've got Betts, you've got Bellinger, you've got Trace Thompson, you've got Gallo as a defensive player. I mean, no matter what the platoon is, they've got guys that are going to steal a lot of hits and steal home runs. So I do think this is the best team we've seen in LA. And in fact, somebody was asking me before, well, how would you compare this? And I'd say, well, I wasn't around for the team in 1955 because I was a wee lad then. I was born, but I wasn't paying attention to baseball then. But if you were to set that team alongside this team, I'd say it's an equal comparison. This team is that good. That said, if they don't win it, then it's going to be another cruel winter, and there's going to be a lot of second. See, that's the thing. People in LA second guess Dave Roberts unmercifully.
Yeah,
it's the whole thing. Your relief pitcher screws up, therefore it's the manager's fault.
Sure.
Right? We've had so many of these October flameouts that part of this is people can't really enjoy the 100 wins because they see Craig Kimbrell give up a home run the other night in Arizona to lose a game in extra innings. And this is after he'd had like 8 straight games where had clean innings, had 1, 2, 3 innings. Yeah. Gets in there, gives up a home run. Oh my God, we have an issue at closer. That sort of thing. It's gloom and doom. It's the fan base is conditioned that way. Let's put it that way.
Does Dave Roberts' 2023 employment status depend on winning the World Series in 2022?
I don't think so. So. I think he's secure, and part of the reason he's secure is because he goes along with what the research and development team comes up with. I mean, there was one slip because Roberts usually does not disclose that stuff, and I think we all pretty much understand that Andrew Friedman's staff has a large input into the decisions that are made in a particular game. The one time that Roberts sort of slipped was Game 5 of the division series last year against the Giants, when you've got a 20-game winner ready to take the mound and they decide, oh, we'll go with a closer today. We'll use Corey Knebel and then bring Julio Urias in the second inning. And that way they have to pinch hit for all these guys. Obviously they overthought it. And afterwards, Roberts admitted this came from the tippy top of the organization. So, but generally, they like him. He's not going anywhere. I don't think, barring the absolutely unexpected. But no, I don't think losing the World Series this year would get him fired.
Well, on the flip side, then, can he look forward to the kind of longevity that Walter Alston or Tommy Lasorda had, where he's going to be the guy for decades?
You would think so, but if they have like 3 or 4 seasons where all of a sudden they're not in the playoffs, or if they're struggling to get in, and that's going to be harder now with 3 wild cards, but it's possible. I mean, if they have a downturn, anything's possible.
Sure. Lastly, I'm going to ask you to get a little bit more big picture. As a reporter, you've had access for a long time, but I want you to talk a little bit about how reporting has changed, especially in the wake of COVID, and the things that were instituted in order to keep people safe during COVID. Are they ever going to go back? The distance that I perceive anyway, I've never had access, but my perception is that there's a greater distance now between the press and the players. Is that ever going to revert to the way it was, or is that door shut?
I doubt it. I think that door's shut, and that was happening before COVID. I mean, COVID gave teams an opportunity to close the clubhouses and gave the players an opportunity to decide, well, this going without having to talk to the media, that's a good thing. I don't think it's a good thing, but it's beside the point. But the clubhouses are open again. But what we are seeing, and we all have to wear masks and we all have to be vaccinated and whatnot, and I have no problem with that. I'm getting my next booster tomorrow, so pray for me. Hope I don't have too bad a reaction. But no, what has happened over the years is modern clubhouses have plenty of hiding places, and players tend to use those hiding places. So we will go in 3.5 hours before a game. Clubhouse opens at 3 for 7 o'clock game. So it's more like 4 hours. Nobody's in there. I mean, you go in there to talk to somebody, usually he's not in there. And if you ask the PR person, well, is he going to be available? It's hit or miss. Sometimes they will, sometimes they won't. But and some of that is the reduction of influence in the print media because of the fact that there are fewer of us now. There are fewer newspapers. Our circulation is not what it was. And there's more of an accent on making sure that the team chroniclers get their access. The TV partner or the TV network that covers the games. In the Dodgers case, they own Sportsnet LA, so it's basically in-house TV. The reporter for the radio flagship, the reporter for the team website or for MLB.com. Those are, and this is what I brought up when we had the Zoom sessions. They would always get the first questions, and they'd always get the bulk of the questions before anybody else got called on. So basically, the teams are telling the press, well, we don't really need you, but come around anyway. And the players are basically telling us, we don't need you guys because we have social media and we can send an unfiltered message and build our brand that way. So that's kind of what we're dealing with. And as a beat writer, the beat writers who are there every day are still able to develop relationships with players. And so it's not as bad as it could be, but it sure is not as good as it was even a decade or 15 years ago. And as a columnist, I've reached the point where I don't have to quote you. And there have been times when a player would not want to talk about a play. And he said, well, write what you see, write what you saw. And my response would be, you're not going to like it. I'm giving you a chance to give me some input. And if you refuse, then don't complain about the story. The one thing I will add, there are guys that are stand-up guys. And Kimbrel is kind of a stand-up guy. I mean, he's not been out there every time after he's gotten rocked, but he's kind of a stand-up guy. But Kenley Jansen, the guy who preceded him, was so accountable. After a blown game, after a blown save, he'd be out there. He'd be at his locker. He'd talk to anybody who wanted to talk to him. And that's the sort of thing I respect. Being accountable, taking responsibility for your screw ups or your mistakes or bad pitches or what have you. And maybe it wasn't reflected in the crowd reaction because the crowd's like, oh, he screwed up. It's, oh no, here he comes again. So they boo him. But I think deep down there's a respect for guys like that who are accountable and will face the bad as well as they do the good.
Jim Alexander is a sports columnist for the Southern California News Group, covering sports in Southern California for more than 4 decades. His new book, recently published by McFarland, is Dodgers, an informal history from Flatbush to Chavez Ravine. Go get it. Jim, thanks for your time and best luck with the book.
Thank you very much.
Thanks to everyone out there for tuning into the Pandemic Baseball Book Club. We'll see you next time.